Good morning and welcome to the OCP Virtual Summit. I am talking to you today from Nairobi, Kenya, and as we say locally, Jambo. My name is Paul Statham and I'm joined by Tony Wabala and Dan Njoroge, the co-founders at Atlancis, who will be online to answer any questions later. The aim of this presentation is to go through the journey that Atlancis has taken from traditional OEM to OCP, the findings that we've had from that journey, and also the foundations it lays for the future strategy of Atlancis. So if we take a look back from where we've come from, we've been operating for nearly 10 years, and for most of that time been servicing major mobile operators, ISPs, financial institutions across the east of Africa, which if you look at the shaded countries there is Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, Malawi and Zambia. And most of our projects have been in the data center, big turnkey projects supported by a very strong consulting practice, project management practice and service management and support. And whilst we look back on a history largely of OEMs, those principles are very true to where we are needed to be with OCP. So why the change of strategy? As you can see on the left of the slide, we have a pedigree with many of the major OEMs across the world and have delivered those, as I said before, and turnkey solutions into the data centers of some of the premium customers in enterprise and wholesale across the east of Africa. But not only our own experience, what the voice of the customer was telling us is that there are areas of OEM that are left wanting. So in terms of development and training, a lot of the higher value tasks are performed by either expatriates coming into East Africa or local talent being taken outside of the region. Whereas we believe with OCP, there's an opportunity for much more investment locally and for that training to be invested in the local economy. TCO is a quite compelling reason around OCP. We've seen a significant reduction in our cost of acquisition of hardware and also the operation of those systems, hardware, software and data to deliver customer expectations. There's also, traditionally with OEMs, a lack of budgetary control, which leads nicely onto licensing, where it's quite complex models that aren't necessarily understood in years 2, 3, 4, 5. Year 1, when the acquisition's made, licensing is quite clear, but thereafter it can lead to significant bill shock. Vendor lock-in is an issue. A lot of customers in East Africa are locked in with one vendor, which tends to lead to overinvestment in legacy systems, the lack of flexibility, the lack of scalability, and a very low power of negotiation. And lastly, the lack of interoperability between the leading OEMs. It is their business model to lock down open infrastructure, put their own brand on it, and that has led to a lot of project failures that we've seen historically. In terms of Atlantis' own experience, it was very much around developing our own content and developing our own applications. Having had those relationships with the OEMs of the world, then obviously we looked at them as a potential infrastructure platform. But at that time, we partnered with a company called Vespertech in the UK and went down the path of open compute with a combination of open compute and IT renew infrastructure, and it gave us a quite shocking in many ways eye-opener as to what could be achieved outside of traditional OEMs. So I've mentioned earlier some of the benefits that we've seen of OCP versus traditional OEM, and I will cover later some of the quantitative values that we've seen that make this such a compelling decision, both for Atlantis and for our customer base and for our future strategy. So in terms of hardware, seeing significantly shorter lead times. We are dealing directly with the manufacturers. We're not going through, dealing directly with the ODMs. We're not going through OEMs. Much higher interoperability. I think that's a no-brainer. We were able to design it locally, working with Vespatech in the UK. And in the case of IT Renew, we're actually seeing lower failure rates on components than buying new. I always like to say that IT Renew is like a Mercedes-Benz with 5,000 kilometers on the clock and one careful lady owner. Those components have been in some of the greatest data centers in the world. In terms of licensing, then there are little to no licensing fees, and we are enjoying working with the software vendors around that. That obviously leads to no vendor lock-in, gives us an increased negotiation power on behalf of our customers and ourselves. And you're also accessing a development pool that, yes, we want to nurture very, very thoroughly in Africa, but also globally. In terms of management and support, in terms of our managed service proposition built on OCP, we can design the service to bespoke customer needs. We are not reselling an OEM service. We are designing our own service and taking it to market. The total cost of ownership that we mentioned above is passed on to customers, so we've got a very price-compelling, bespoke service that we can deliver to African customers. It allows us a lot more innovation as an organization. We have around 100 staff, 70 of which are involved in technical and service delivery. And having this open platform, open hardware, open software, open data has given them the scope to be much more innovative. We have found significantly improved reliability, but also our ability to support and resolve is reliant on us and our stock holding of widely available components. So we can hold stock locally. We are not going to global distribution centers of the OEMs and waiting for stock to be available for Africa. And again, as Atlancis, we can provide our customers very direct and very local African customer support, which is increasingly important. In terms of open source and software, we have built systems called Kinetic, which allows us to crowdsource. And in terms of our learning management system, that allowed us to crowdsource content, but also to crowdsource the application development. That leads to quicker times to market. It leads to us investing in local talent, and it gives us a great platform for further solution development. And this decision led to some great coverage in the media globally, in Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance, etc., and locally across the African continent. We had some great support from Steve Helvey and the team in doing this, but it does show there's an appetite for consumption of OCP across the world. Having explored Atlantis' journey from OEM to OCP, I now want to look at some of the barriers to content distribution there are in Africa. This slide shows how some regions, notably South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, lag significantly behind other regions with respect to internet access. However, unlike when Connecting the Next Billion, concept first serviced in late 2006, describing the infrastructural barriers to connecting the second billion internet users, the barrier to further adoption today is less of an infrastructure problem and more of a relevance one. As we see here, 90% of the population have access to a mobile signal. There is a saturation of submarine cables across the west and east of Africa. In Kenya, we're seeing internet wholesaling at less than $2 per megabits on the beach. So we've seen significant infrastructure improvements, but still have low adoption rates. Low adoption rates are, of course, a significant issue in the growth of the digital ecosystem in Africa. However, low growth and adoption rates may be even more worrying. This graph shows how the growth rate of global internet adoption is slowing significantly. While the growth rate is higher in sub-Saharan Africa, it has fluctuated quite a bit historically and is falling now. Our research into this suggests a lack of affordable and relevant content. A study by Research ICT Africa for a selection of countries, as shown in the graph, asked non-users of the internet why they are not online. Too expensive is a predominant one, but we believe that the fixed line and mobile telcos across the continent are addressing that. Users claiming no interest register around 50% in the countries. And it's the predominant answer in all these countries. Don't know how to use it could be attributed in part to a lack of interest in learning how. No friends use it suggests a lack of relevance, as there would be few friends with whom to communicate. The other answers, including don't know what it is and no time, could also be attributed to a lack of compelling reasons for users to learn what the internet is and make time to use it. In order to be relevant, content must be in a language understood by the local population, and it must meet local demand, whether those needs are social, entertainment, educational, government, or business related. While existing international content often may be relevant, Facebook being a great example, it is our findings that locally developed content is often more targeted at the local market. Thus, increasing the development of content is an important factor in the quest to increase internet usage, both by those wishing to make a living creating content and those who wish to use that content. And here we believe a data center with OCP equipment not only gives a lower capital cost of putting that equipment in, but open source software gives access to a greater local community for both application and content development. Based on some of those research findings and our knowledge of Africa, Atlancis believes there is a great opportunity to use OCP as a platform for getting content more local and closer to the users of the internet in the countries, and therefore promoting wider uptake of the internet with applications that are significantly more valuable to the consumer than we have at the moment. In our own experience of developing iLearn, a learning management system for Kenya primary school, we have found the following results. Our capex was 70 to 95% lower than it would have been if we would have bought traditional OEM. We were able to start small and scale up with a very flexible model in terms of adding compute, storage, network, etc. Our occupation of the data center space was half what it would have been with a traditional OEM, and we were seeing a payback period of around 10 months. In terms of licensing and our operating expenses, we saw a massive 95% reduction in those licensing fees, an 80% reduction in the implementation costs, using our own staff and locally sourced staff. We also developed a crowdsourcing platform, Kinetic, that created 100 African jobs in content development and application development, which in turn allowed us to deliver this project by 75% less time than it would have been if we were reliant on OEMs. In terms of the ongoing management, our support costs, in terms of engineers, management, licensing, etc., were reduced by 58%. We saw our net promoter score increase by a single point, 40% reduction in our operating expenses, and 60% less management time. And then finally, in terms of our development, again, lower capex and opex. We were able to crowdsource the resource pool. We have a natively scalable architecture which our engineers are trained in and can very easily design and implement. And these really result in disruptive market inputs, which we believe, if taken to scale, can create a cloud grid across Africa to allow content, mobile networks, financial services to serve their consumers much better with local content that is relevant to the consumer. The infrastructure Atlancis deployed was a mixture of OCP and IT Renew. And some of the figures with regards to IT Renew are quite staggering. Not only in terms of our capital expenditure, which is shown there in the bottom left with 41% TCO savings over an OEM equivalent, but look at some of the sustainability and environmental impacts that we could have to scale this up across Africa. In terms of the data center and the equipment, we're using second life equipment, so we're not manufacturing it again from new, and then are emissions around the data center are around 25% less than an OEM. Of course, in Africa, there is a massive population of underserved. And again, I repeat, our conviction that if we can lower the costs around the data center, particularly in the platforms and the development, as we've shown we can do, then we can access a lot more of that population and serve them with relevant and local content. And lastly, in Africa, there's an enormous funding gap in ICT that is just being perpetuated by enterprises and governments and mobile operators buying traditional OEM brands when there is a compelling alternative in OCP. Looking at the Atlancis strategy going forward, it is to build a cloud grid across Africa based on OCP. We have developed our own solutions in EdTech, GovTech, and general purpose cloud, as well as human capital based on OCP, and we realize the enormous savings in terms of total cost of ownership and environmental sustainability that can be made. We are further developing industry solutions in agri-tech, health tech, and security. It is our intention to deploy OCP platforms in multiple data centers across the continent, which will allow CSPs, mobile operators, content owners to have an edge device based on OCP close to their community that they want to serve. Those devices will also be platforms for Atlancis industry solutions, EdTech, GovTech, general purpose cloud and human capital, as well as other content developers and application developers. So the platform will be there for all to use and to develop the local content and the local applications which we believe the market, the consumer desires, but the costs of development and the costs of hosting and the costs of building that infrastructure are currently prohibitive. It is our intention to activate this strategy by distributing with data centers, content service providers, systems integrators, mobile operators, and licensees across the continent later in 2020. We are particularly interested in any support from the community in those areas, but also security and telco open edge. We believe there's further cost savings in lowering the CapEx and OpEx of operating a distributed telecommunications network. And if you'd like any further information on Atlancis, then please visit that website there. I'd like to thank you for your time this morning, and I hope this has been of interest. Please do get in touch with me if you'd like any further information. I would like you all to stay safe and invite you now for any questions that you may have.